Welcome back to Beau's workshop, or at least Beau's new workshop. It's been a while since I've done a video. My wife and kids, we've moved to a new property. We've been setting up a new little workshop space here, and we're ready to build a new boat. We're going to build like a Jon Boat inspired power punt. I guess it depends on where you're from, what you would call something like this, but it's really just a small flat bottom boat that we can throw in the back of the pickup truck, hit some of these canals in Central Florida, have something that's easy to move, and with the potential to put it under power or paddle it, pull it, it should be pretty flexible. This build's partly inspired by scrap wood I have laying around. I have this 3/4 inch piece of marine grade plywood. I bought a piece to fix my bass boat and make hatches for, and this is what was left over, but it's a nice bottom size for a Jon Boat. I had this piece of plywood laying around. It's 36 inches wide. It's going to make a nice transom. As we scroll through the workshop, we got the rail bird. It's getting a fresh coat of paint. I have all this scrap wood, so I'm hoping to use up some of this. Part of the design is centered around just using up the scrap wood that I have, and I think we'll end up with a pretty neat little boat. There's a lot of neat wood in here. There's some redwood, there's oak, there's cedar. We're going to do a nice little mix of stuff. With the plywood, I used some fabric and I embedded the fabric into the board with fiberglass. So this will be the floor of the boat, the deck, and just a little decorative element. It's a little bit of a splurge just to make it look cool, but yeah, we'll just be able to go over that with spar varnish and there won't be a need to paint it. I'm going to walk you through the design process. Part of the reason why the dimensions are what they are is this is the size wood I have laying around. So that 81.5 inch long, 3/4 inch plywood, that's going to be the deck. It's 3/4 inch. A lot of punts are made with just a piece of plywood and they'll have knees instead of frames. There's no keelson. So we're going to kind of model off of that type of a structure. And the transom is going to be 15 inches tall. It'll be 36 inches wide. I already have it laid out. We'll lay the frames out. I'm going to make a frame for the bench. This will be 16 inches off the back. These two frames will be 16 inches. Obviously, this is not the scale. There'll be a little knee for a frame here. There'll be a frame in the front, and then we'll end up running some stringers and attach a deck on the bow. And I'll give all the measurements and dimensions if you would take notes as we're going through this, and you'll be able to build this boat. So right now, the bottom of the transom is going to be 26 3/4 of an inch. The top is 36 inches and it is 15 inches tall. I've laid this out with Sharpie. I like to use pen or pencil to get finer lines to make real accurate cuts. So I'm leaving the left side in pen so I can make more accurate cuts. And then I've used Sharpie on the other side so that it's easy to see for the camera. So the transom's 15 inches tall. The plywood will overlap the 3/4 inch bottom piece. So the other frames are going to sit on top of the plywood. So I'll make those frames 3/4 of an inch shorter so that it's all even. And then in the bow of the boat, I'll make it kind of raise up a little bit, but I haven't worked that out completely yet. But there'll be a bench in the back held up by two knees, and then there'll be a frame that connects each side there to support the bench. So we'll need 4 pieces that look like this. They're 14 1/4 inches long. Those are the angles that you need to cut. You can use that by laying it out on a board like this. So, and then we're using 1x3s, which is 3/4 by 2.5 inch. So I cut out one of the knees, and as you can see, you can use those nice pin lines to mark your angles, and you can cut that accurately. You can transpose that to the other side. Lay that right on the Sharpie outlines. We got a good cut. Now we can use that piece for a template to make additional knees. Not every bit of this board is good. There's a crack in that, so I'm not going to use this middle section. On the other side of that, there's an additional crack, but I can get 2 knees out of this scrap board. Once you make the template, you make 4 that are exactly the same, stack them together, clean it up with the belt sander a little bit, then they're all equal. And you have the first 4 knees made. I want the boat to have a little bit of shape, so for the knee here in the midship, it's going to be based off 17 inches off the midline. So it'll end up being 2 inches more narrow midship than at the transom. And then this frame will be even yet a little bit more narrow, and the bow will be even a little bit more narrow as we figure out the design. Now this knee, I want it to be a little bit thicker so there's more to screw into. So I have this piece of old 2x material. This is a heart of pine. It cleans up beautifully. It's kind of gray looking, but when we cut into that, it has this beautiful wood tone. So there we have knee number 3, both of them. 17 inches off the midline. The bottom stays the same because we're working with a rectangle for the bottom. And I told you that wood comes out very pretty. And it gets really orange when you put epoxy on it or spar varnish. So it'll be a kind of a decorative element. I'll round off those edges and shape them up nice, because that'll be right where you might kick it with your toe or something. When you're building the frames, you just lay the boards out on the layout board. And then you can come and mark with a little dot where you need to cut. And then you're not going to fight with protractors and trying to cut the right angle. And with the layout board, and there's frame number 4. And trying to keep this all straight on video is kind of a mess, but I think we're getting the point across. So frame number 4 is 16 inches off the midline at the top. The bottom, it's the same measurement for all the knees and all the frames, transom, all that, share that. Now we'll have to make a bow, and I haven't worked that out yet. Here's that frame number 4. We're working on the top rail. This will be part of what holds up the deck on the bow. All right, so I laid out the frames on the layout board. I'm just going to I got some PL Premium. Use any structural glue, polyurethane based. I'm just going to come in here and get a little glue on there, both sides. Made some marks to show me where to put the glue. Excuse the moan sounds. Of course, someone would start moaning when we're trying to film. I'm just going to smear that for a nice even coating. I want full contact with the woods in the glue. The glue holds these parts together really more than the screws does anyway. So you just want to make sure you get a good coating. Sometimes I'll just pre-drill some of the screws because the surfaces are a little slippery when you first put the glue on. I use my guidelines, check and make sure everything's just so. Got some stainless steel deck screws I'm using. There'll be a shear clamp right through here. We're gonna have to notch this out, so you don't want to put a screw right where that's gonna be. So leave yourself some space to work. Oh, I missed my spot. Check and recheck. It's easier to fix it before the glue dries. double check everything looks good enough to me. It's not NASA, but we want it as close as we can get it, and that's going to work out fine. All right, this will be the fourth frame on my little sketch. This will be right here is what we're looking on. This is more like a Jeff Spira frame versus a knee. So I'm setting it up to glue. Got everything sitting here where I wanted. I've triple checked it. Let's get the glue. Stuff tacks up pretty quick, so I don't like to leave it too air exposed very long. Try to be pretty gentle with it. I have to just double check everything every time I touch it. Affecting the wood, I want to make sure I put an extra dollop of glue in there to push it in. Fill up any voids, don't want any space for water to creep in. Once I get everything together, I like to mix up wood flour and epoxy, and I just fill every little crack like it's caulking. That stuff is as strong as wood is. Everything ends up tying together. There'll be some essentially stitch and glue concepts and ply on frame concepts for this particular build. This is reclaimed wood. There's already a hole right here. That looks like a nice place for a screw. And I won't have to fill that hole. It's essentially how you put any of those Jeff Spira boats together. Make these wood frames, put your shear clamp and your chine log in. There's a keelson in the middle. You could take that design concept and build about anything you'd want with it. All right, now that I've made my frames and knees, I'm just going to cut up this layout board because it's going to be my transom. So for the transom frame, just line the board up with the top of the plywood. Just draw our marks. For the bottom of the transom, I'm going to have the plywood overlap the deck plywood. So I'm just going to put a little 3/4 inch space. I'm like to mark my frames. works. Come over to transfer that to the surface. So a little straight edge. Make sure marks laid out. Quick little cut. Voila. It's that fast. So when I cut with a pin mark, I just cut right on the outside of the line for precision. You always see a little bit of ink poking through. Ends up helping me not make a mess of everything. Precise cuts. If you cut right in the middle of the line, your saw blade's going to remove material and you're going to come up short. So now we're just going to glue that down and screw it. First couple knees are going to form the seat. I use this plywood. I'm going to make a little nook to be able to slide some small things into. I'll seal that around the floor so if a little water gets in the boat, that area will stay dry, and if water gets in there, you'll have to tip it upside down to get it out, but I'll store it upside down anyway. So this frame will hold up the seat. I'm going to put some flotation in the seat as well. I have to notch the frames for the shear clamp. So I took a piece of material that I had laying around. I used a table saw. I made like a 1 3/4 inch. It's about 5/16 thick too. It must be cypress. It's pretty flexible. So I cut a little blank to give me a template. I'll line that up. Just that outside edge of the frame. So then I'll use that Japanese pull type saw and we'll notch that out. Alright, so I got my little notch cut. This boat is mostly rectangular. There won't be a lot of fine tuning, especially with the seat frame, but you'll have that shear clamp come in. And there's a little corner sticking up. I'll have to knock that off with the plane or a belt sander. We'll epoxy that in, screw it in. The shear clamp goes from the transom to the bow. That Japanese pull type saw is really good for this. This one's getting a little old, it's getting a little dull, but it's still doing the trick for now. Using the PL Premium, a little bit will smush out of the joint, and it kind of expands slightly, so you'll get some of this. This pull saw is nice. You can just come in and cut that out with the pull saw. It's a good way to deal with that little bit of a mess. All right, have the seat frame made. Everything is notched out for the shear clamps. I have a piece of scrap 1/4 inch Lowe. I need to cut a piece that's 14.5 by 33.25 to make the bottom part of the flotation pod in this bench seat. I have the bottom plate put on this bench. Once we mount this in the boat and get the sides on, then I'm going to pour foam in the top, and then we'll cap it off with the board for the seat. And then we'll have a nice little extra bit of flotation to help deal with the weight of the motor. This will probably give us 45 pounds of flotation with foam in it, based on my calculations. All right, so I have the seat frame made up, and I'm going to lay it out. I'm going to pre-drill some holes to mount this to the deck of the boat. So I got 16 inches exact, 16 inches exact. I measured these front edges. Everything's looking pretty great. There's a little bit of flex that needs to happen in this front corner, but everything else is super solid. So what I'm going to do, so I want to pre-drill some holes. So I'm just going to come and outline these surfaces with the Sharpie so I can pre-drill some holes, and then know that I'll hit exactly where I want to hit with the screws. I'm just going to trace inside and out. It's going to be a wood ply or epoxy fillet in all these joints. Essentially going to glue it down to the deck. All right, and we can move that, and we know where to drill the holes. And these holes here I'll have to hit at an angle to kind of match this plywood. Trying to work pretty clean. I need to do another flood coat of epoxy on this fiberglass to make sure that there's not little fine crevices for dirt to get into. They're lucky enough not to get chickens tracking all over it. I'm going to pre-drill at least a couple of holes before I put the glue on, so I can make sure everything's tracking where we want it. I'm going to rough up the surface of the fiberglass. I used as little as epoxy as I could, so these fibers are fairly exposed. I want that to be really nice and rough so that the glue has something to stick into. This should make some little fiberglass splinters to help grip. I'm using some fiberglass tape on the inside. Working on maximum adhesion. Get this out of the way. Other side. Sanding, we'll get this back edge where the transom is going to mount. The PL Premium, we're going to run a bead. Work that around, make sure I got all the surface contact that I want. I'm going to try to set this plate in place without making a terrible mess everywhere. Running all my good work. Some stainless steel deck screws. That side. This one, this knee a little bit before I drill, so I'm just using my hand and thumb and pulling it where I want it. Pre-drilling that hole. Our stainless steel deck screw. Fix that back in alignment. Because I pre-drilled it, it just goes right in the line. And the rest of these screws, I better pre-drill those too. You have multiple drill setups, it speeds you up a lot. This one I'm just going to run straight in. I don't want the screw slipping. Better sink that just a hair. Hold that frame nice and down, nice and tight. Get this good surface connection with the glue. That side attached. I don't have a great fabrication bench here. You can build a strong back, build the boat off of it. Here I just have a plastic table. I threw some boards under it. I got it pretty level, and I think it'll end up working out good enough. I need to build a nice fabrication bench. All right, now that we got the frame on, we'll double check before the glue dries. 16 inches exactly. 16 inches exactly. Exactly what we want. And now we're going to attach a transom. I'm just going to lay a bead of glue right here in the corner. We're going to smear some on another surface. This is essentially a double lap joint that we're working with. Smear that all over. See, I'm going to reinforce all this with fiberglass tape and fill it sort of like a stitch and glue boat, but all these frame connections, we're just going to make sure we get plenty of adhesive. All right, I'm pretty set up. I got my drills in place. I'm set the transom right where I want it. We'll go that around a little bit, make sure that we got good surface adhesion. I'm just going to run a guide screw in, keep this from shifting around. hopefully prevent plywood from cracking when I screw into it. Keep wiping away the glue. I have some spilling out, then not enough holding everything together. Just wipe it off. Get a couple screws into the frame the other way. Always have a tendency of probably using more screws than I need. A couple extra bucks and screws ain't gonna break my bank. Screw on that one.
It was right by the...
I think I missed. But this last screw was a mess. We'll back it out. Barely missed. I'm just going to come in with the angle, drill more of an angle. There we go. That hit. Pretty good. I'm going to have to hog a little bit of material off of this side. It's pretty close. I already pre-drilled the screws in this knee, and I have a couple of screws sticking in this board already. So I'm just going to add the glue, and with those knees already stuck on there, it makes it real easy to put on. Just a little bit of a glop there. A little piece of scrap wood to spread it around. The hole with the screws already in, it's easy just to index it. There we go. So I have that front frame already mounted. We didn't really video that. We're just screwing it to the very front edge of the deck. And then I have my shear clamp roughed in on this side. I haven't glued it yet. I was going to put the other side together. On the shear clamp, I marked out 9.5 foot and 10 foot so I could see how long I wanted to make it. I think it's going to end up being 9.5 foot. So I'm going to go sand on the second shear clamp and we'll mock it up and I'll glue them into place. And then I'm going to epoxy everything that I have done so far. And I'm going to think about how I want to put the bow together. I decided to make the bow 28 inches wide and the boat will be 9.5 feet long. So I measured from the very back of the transom to the very tip of the shear clamp and I put a mark on it. And then I notched the board for the bow and I used tie down to cinch it together. And because of the angle, that tie down with those hooks over like that helped flex the board to go into the notches pretty easy. And then I just screwed it in. So now I just got to make a frame and some decking for that gap. I'm working on the bow. I'm putting a couple boards on to help me lay out the angles that I want to use. I've just used screws and holding it in a place that hasn't been glued in at this point. So I had a piece of plywood that I just cut a 25-degree angle to mount to the bow. And then this will be a little frame and I used a 20-degree angle for it. I end up cutting just a little bit out of this frame right here, 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to do a 2-layer Lowe bow. I'll have a little bit of a curve in it. It'll have fiberglass in the middle. And the frames are going to go sideways like in a punt. I have a piece of damaged and clearance Lowe. This is about $11 down from like 20 some dollars. So this will be a good material for this scrap boat project. So the bottom of the panel is going to be 27 3/4 of an inch. About halfway up, it's going to be 18 inches. There will be another frame. The total length of this panel is 35 inches. I plotted out a center point with the square, and there'll be 13 5/16 on each side. That'll give us the shape of the bow. Here we have Red inspecting my work. She's making sure that everything is going as it should. What I'm working on right now is I'm grinding this 3/4 inch plywood to the same angle as the frames. A nice little trick is I'll come to each frame and I'll flatten that out. And then I'll get a straight edge and I'll put a Sharpie mark as a guideline to keep me straight. And you just got to keep fine tuning it. You could use a plane. I don't like using planes on plywood. I'm not that great of a woodworker, but so we're getting this side's ready. Might need a little fine tuning. We got the piece for the bow. Make some side pieces and I'll base it off of this side and I'll make the other side flex and fit so that I have that angle. Yep, she just wants to re-step in there. End up having an egg in the boat before we know it. I cut a little strip of wood to support the edge of the bow, give me something to screw the sides onto. And I have this other piece. That's some of that scrap. I'm just sticking it on the side with a couple screws. I traced outline with a Sharpie. I'll cut that out and it'll be ready to put on. I'll make a mirror image. I'll use that as a template for the other side, and if I have to flex it to make sure that the shape's the same, then that's what I'll have to do.